I broke up with him for being broke. Then I found out he was a secret millionaire. You won't believe what I discovered 3 months after I dumped my boyfriend for having no money and no ambition. While I was celebrating my new relationship with a successful lawyer, I found out that my broke ex-boyfriend was actually worth over $50 million and had been testing me to see if I loved him for who he was or what he could give me. By the time I realized what I had lost, he was already engaged to someone else and had bought the company where I worked just to fire me personally. But the most devastating part? He recorded our entire breakup conversation and played it at his engagement party to show everyone exactly what kind of person I really was. My name is Stephanie, and I'm 29 years old. 2 years ago, I thought I had found the perfect boyfriend when I started dating Jake, a quiet, humble guy who worked as a mechanic at a small auto repair shop. In the beginning of our relationship, Jake seemed like everything I wanted. He was kind, funny, thoughtful, and completely devoted to me. But after 18 months together, I started to feel like Jake wasn't ambitious enough, and that our relationship didn't have the kind of future I wanted for myself. When I first met Jake at a coffee shop near my office, I was immediately attracted to his genuine, down-to-earth personality. He wasn't trying to impress me with expensive clothes or flashy stories about his success. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person, asking thoughtful questions about my goals, my interests, and my dreams for the future. Jake worked as a mechanic at Murphy's Auto Repair, a small family-owned shop that had been in business for decades. He lived in a modest apartment, drove an older Honda Civic, and seemed content with his simple lifestyle. At first, I found his humility and lack of materialism refreshing compared to other guys I had dated who were always trying to show off their wealth or status. "I love working with my hands," Jake told me during one of our early conversations. "There's something satisfying about fixing things that are broken and helping people get back on the road. It might not be glamorous, but it's honest work that makes a difference in people's lives." I admired Jake's work ethic and his genuine passion for helping others, even if his job wasn't particularly lucrative or prestigious. He would come home from work with grease under his fingernails and stories about the interesting cars he had worked on or the grateful customers he had helped that day. Our relationship was comfortable and easy in the beginning. Jake was attentive and romantic in simple ways. He would bring me flowers from the grocery store, cook dinner for me in his small kitchen, and plan inexpensive dates like hiking trips or picnics in the park. He never tried to impress me with expensive restaurants or lavish gifts, but he made me feel loved and appreciated through his actions and attention. Jake also had this wonderful way of listening to me and remembering details about things I cared about. If I mentioned that I was stressed about a work project, he would check in with me later to see how it went. If I said I was craving a particular type of food, he would surprise me by cooking it or finding a good restaurant that served it. But as our relationship progressed and became more serious, I started to notice things about Jake's lifestyle that began to concern me. While his apartment was clean and comfortable, it was small and furnished with basic, inexpensive furniture. His car was reliable but old and showed signs of wear. His clothes were practical and well-maintained, but they were clearly not expensive brands. More concerning to me was Jake's apparent lack of ambition for advancing his career or increasing his income. He seemed perfectly content working as a mechanic indefinitely, without any apparent interest in starting his own business, pursuing additional training, or finding ways to earn more money. "Don't you ever think about doing something more with your life?" I asked Jake one evening as we were having dinner at his apartment. "You're so smart and skilled. I feel like you could accomplish so much more if you really applied yourself." Jake looked at me with a confused expression. "What do you mean?" "I love what I do and I'm good at it. I help people solve problems every day, and I earn enough money to live comfortably. What more do I need?" His response frustrated me because it seemed like Jake had no drive to better himself or create a more prosperous future. I was working hard to advance my career in marketing, taking classes to develop new skills, and constantly looking for opportunities to increase my income and professional status. Jake's contentment with his current situation felt like complacency to me. As time went on, I started to feel embarrassed about introducing Jake to my friends and colleagues. My social circle consisted mostly of ambitious professionals who worked in business, law, medicine, and other high-paying fields. Their boyfriends and husbands were lawyers, doctors, executives, and entrepreneurs who could afford expensive lifestyles and sophisticated social activities. When I brought Jake to office parties or social gatherings, I could see my friends trying to be polite while clearly judging our relationship. They would ask Jake what he did for work, and when he said he was a mechanic, their enthusiasm would visibly diminish as they struggled to find common ground for conversation. "Stephanie, are you sure Jake is right for you?" My best friend Miranda asked me after a company holiday party where Jake had been noticeably out of place among my colleagues. "You're so driven and ambitious, and he seems nice but not really on your level professionally." Miranda's comment stung because it reflected concerns I had been having myself. I was 28 years old, established in my career, and thinking about my future in terms of marriage, children, and the kind of lifestyle I wanted to have. Jake's lack of financial resources and professional ambition made me worry that he wouldn't be able to provide the kind of life I envisioned for myself. The differences in our financial situations became more apparent as our relationship became more serious. When we went out to dinner, I often ended up paying because Jake would choose inexpensive restaurants and seemed uncomfortable when I wanted to try more upscale places. When we talked about taking vacations together, Jake would suggest camping trips or budget travel options because he couldn't afford luxury resorts or expensive flights. I started to feel like Jake was holding me back from enjoying the lifestyle that my own career success had made possible for me. I could afford nice restaurants, designer clothes, and luxury experiences, but I felt guilty enjoying these things when Jake couldn't participate or contribute financially. The breaking point came when Jake's old Honda Civic finally broke down beyond repair, and he started talking about buying another used car from the same era. I suggested that maybe it was time for him to invest in something more reliable and professional looking, but Jake insisted that he didn't need anything fancy as long as it got him to work safely. "Jake, you're almost 30 years old," I said during our conversation about his car situation. "Don't you think you should have something better to show for all your years of working? Don't you want more out of life than just getting by?" Jake looked hurt by my comments. "Stephanie, I thought you understood that I don't measure success by material possessions. I'm happy with my life, my work, and our relationship. Isn't that what matters?" But I wasn't happy anymore. I had started to feel like I was dating someone who lacked the drive and ambition that I found attractive in a partner. I wanted to be with someone who shared my goals for financial success and social advancement, someone who could be an equal partner in building the kind of life I wanted. Around this time, I met Derek at a networking event for marketing professionals. Derek was a successful lawyer who owned his own practice, drove a Mercedes, and lived in a luxury condo downtown. He was everything that Jake wasn't: ambitious, wealthy, sophisticated, and eager to impress me with expensive dates and lavish gifts. Derek pursued me aggressively, sending flowers to my office, inviting me to exclusive restaurants, and making it clear that he could offer me the kind of lifestyle that Jake never could. At first, I resisted Derek's advances because I was still in a relationship with Jake, but I couldn't deny that I was attracted to Derek's success and the exciting life he represented. "Stephanie, you deserve someone who can match your ambition and give you everything you want," Derek told me during one of our conversations. "Why are you settling for someone who can't even afford to take you on a proper vacation?" Derek's words resonated with my own doubts about my relationship with Jake. I had been feeling increasingly frustrated with Jake's lack of ambition and financial limitations, and Derek was offering me everything that Jake couldn't provide: financial security, social status, and access to the finer things in life. After weeks of internal struggle, I made the decision to break up with Jake and start dating Derek officially. I knew it would hurt Jake, but I convinced myself that we simply weren't compatible in the long term, and that it was better to end things before we got even more serious. I planned to have the breakup conversation with Jake at his apartment, where we could talk privately, and I could explain my decision honestly. I had practiced what I was going to say, trying to find a way to be truthful about my concerns without being unnecessarily cruel. But when the moment came, I found myself being more brutal than I had intended. Jake's confusion and hurt brought out a defensive side of me that wanted to justify my decision by emphasizing all the ways that our relationship wasn't working. "Jake, I think we need to talk about our future," I began, sitting across from him in his small living room. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I don't think we're right for each other long term." Jake looked shocked and hurt. What do you mean? I thought things were going well between us. Did I do something wrong? It's not that you did anything wrong, I said, trying to sound gentle but firm. It's just that we want different things out of life. I'm ambitious and goal-oriented, and I need to be with someone who shares those qualities. Jake's expression became more confused. I don't understand. I work hard, I care about you, and I thought we were building something good together. What does ambition have to do with our relationship? That's when I became more direct and hurtful than I should have been. Jake, you're almost 30 and you're still working as a mechanic in someone else's garage. You drive a broken-down car, you live in a tiny apartment, and you seem completely content to stay in the same place for the rest of your life. Jake's face showed the pain that my words were causing, but I continued anyway. I need to be with someone who can provide financial security and who has goals that go beyond just getting by. I want to travel, live in a nice house, and build a life with someone who has ambition and success. You're a good person, but you're just not that person. Jake was quiet for a long moment before he responded. So this is about money? You're breaking up with me because I don't make enough money or have the right kind of job. It's not just about money, I said, though even as I spoke I realized that money was a huge part of it. It's about compatibility and having similar life goals. I don't think you understand what I need from a relationship. Jake nodded slowly, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. I understand perfectly, Stephanie. You've made it very clear what you value in a partner. And it's not love, loyalty, or genuine connection. It's financial status and material success. His response made me angry because it made me sound shallow and materialistic. That's not fair, Jake. I'm being practical about what I need for a successful relationship. There's nothing wrong with wanting financial security and a partner who shares my ambitions. You're right, Jake said quietly. There's nothing wrong with knowing what you want. I just wish I had known 18 months ago that what you wanted was someone's bank account and not their heart. The conversation ended with Jake accepting my decision with more dignity than I probably deserved. He didn't beg me to reconsider or make promises to change. He simply told me that he hoped I would find happiness with someone who could give me what I was looking for. Within 2 weeks, I was officially dating Derek and enjoying the lifestyle that I had been missing with Jake. Derek took me to expensive restaurants, bought me designer clothes, and planned elaborate weekend trips to luxury resorts. He introduced me to his successful friends and colleagues, and I felt like I was finally part of the social circle that matched my professional ambitions. Derek was attentive and generous, constantly surprising me with expensive gifts and romantic gestures that showed off his wealth and success. He would send flowers to my office with notes about how lucky he felt to be with someone as beautiful and accomplished as me. You deserve to be treated like a queen, Derek would tell me as he presented me with jewelry or planned another extravagant date. I can't believe that mechanic didn't appreciate what he had. For 3 months, I felt vindicated in my decision to leave Jake for Derek. I was living the life I had always wanted, attending exclusive events, wearing designer clothes, and dating a successful man who could afford to give me everything I desired. But then something happened that shattered my entire understanding of the choice I had made. I was having lunch with my colleague Jennifer when she started talking about a news article she had read about young entrepreneurs who had built successful businesses while maintaining low profiles. There was this fascinating story about a guy who inherited his grandfather's auto repair shop, Jennifer said, showing me the article on her phone. Instead of selling it, he turned it into a chain of luxury car restoration businesses that cater to collectors and wealthy clients. He's worth like $50 million, but he still works as a mechanic because he loves it. Something about Jennifer's description sounded familiar, so I asked to see the article. When she handed me her phone, I nearly choked on my salad. The article featured a large photo of Jake, looking exactly the same as when we were dating, standing next to a beautiful classic car in what was clearly a high-end restoration facility. The headline read, "Local mechanic builds $50 million empire while staying true to his roots." The article went on to describe how Jake had inherited Murphy's auto repair from his grandfather 3 years earlier and had quietly transformed it into an exclusive restoration business that served wealthy collectors around the world. According to the article, Jake had been approached by luxury car enthusiasts who were willing to pay enormous amounts of money for authentic, high-quality restoration work. Instead of advertising his services or promoting his success, Jake had built his business through word-of-mouth referrals and had maintained the modest, unpretentious image of his grandfather's original shop. The article included quotes from Jake about his business philosophy and his commitment to authentic craftsmanship over flashy marketing. "I don't need people to know how much money I make," Jake was quoted as saying. "I measure success by the quality of my work and the satisfaction of my customers. If someone is only interested in my bank account, they're probably not the kind of person I want in my life anyway." I felt physically sick as I read the article and realized what I had done. Jake hadn't been a broke, unambitious mechanic. He had been a multimillionaire who had chosen to live modestly and test whether people cared about him for his character rather than his wealth. My hands were shaking as I continued reading and discovered that Jake's small apartment was actually a penthouse that he owned in a historic building downtown. His old Honda Civic was apparently just one of several cars he owned, including classic vehicles that were worth more than most people's houses. But the most devastating part of the article was a section about Jake's personal life, where he talked about recently getting engaged to someone who loved him for who he was rather than what he could provide financially. The article included a photo of Jake with his fiancée, a beautiful woman named Emma who looked radiant and genuinely happy. The caption mentioned that they had met shortly after Jake had ended a relationship with someone who didn't share his values about money and success. I realized that Emma was the woman Jake had started dating after I broke up with him, and she was now engaged to a man worth $50 million who had apparently found someone who appreciated his character rather than his bank account. I spent the rest of that day in shock, trying to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. The man I had dumped for being broke and unambitious was actually wealthier than Derek and anyone else I knew combined. Jake had been testing me to see if I could love him without knowing about his money, and I had failed that test spectacularly. But the worst part wasn't just that I had made a terrible mistake. It was realizing what kind of person my behavior had revealed me to be. Jake had seen right through to my values and motivations, and he had found me lacking in the qualities that actually mattered to him. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with learning more about Jake's success and his relationship with Emma. I discovered that his restoration business had clients all over the world, and that he was considered one of the premier experts in classic car restoration. He had built his wealth through genuine skill, hard work, and business acumen, not through luck or inheritance. Meanwhile, Emma appeared to be a kindergarten teacher who lived modestly and seemed to genuinely love Jake for his kindness and character rather than his financial status. In photos, they looked genuinely happy together, sharing simple pleasures like hiking, cooking, and spending time with Emma's students. The contrast between Emma's authentic love for Jake and my own materialistic motivations was devastating to contemplate. Emma had found a multimillionaire who adored her, while I was dating Derek, who was successful but nowhere near Jake's level of wealth, and who I was starting to realize was arrogant and self-centered. My relationship with Derek began to deteriorate as I became distracted and depressed about my discovery regarding Jake. Derek noticed that I was less enthusiastic about our expensive dates and seemed preoccupied with something I wouldn't discuss. "Stephanie, what's wrong with you lately?" Derek demanded during one of our dinners at an upscale restaurant. "You seem completely uninterested in everything we do together. Are you having second thoughts about us?" I wanted to tell Derek the truth about what I had discovered, but I was too ashamed to admit that I had dumped a multimillionaire for being broke. But Derek was perceptive enough to realize that something fundamental had changed in my attitude toward our relationship. He started questioning me about my past relationships and became suspicious that I was still hung up on my ex-boyfriend. "Is this about that mechanic you used to date?" Derek asked one evening when I seemed particularly distracted. "Are you seriously still thinking about some guy who fixes cars for a living?" Derek's dismissive attitude toward Jake made me realize how similarly I had thought about Jake's profession and lifestyle. I had been just as shallow and judgmental as Derek was being, and it was painful to see my own prejudices reflected in someone else's behavior. 3 months after discovering the truth about Jake's wealth, I learned that he was planning an engagement party to celebrate his upcoming marriage to Emma. The party was being held at an exclusive venue downtown, and it was apparently going to be a large celebration with Jake's business associates, family members, and close friends. I became obsessed with the idea of attending Jake's engagement party and somehow explaining my behavior or apologizing for my mistakes. I knew that Jake probably never wanted to see me again, but I felt like I needed to acknowledge what I had done and take responsibility for my shallow, hurtful behavior. Through social media research, I discovered that the engagement party was being held at the Grandview Ballroom, the same venue where Derek had taken me for several expensive dates. I realized that I could probably gain access to the party by arriving early and blending in with the other guests. The night of Jake's engagement party, I got dressed in one of the designer outfits that Derek had bought me and arrived at the Grandview Ballroom just as guests were beginning to arrive. The venue was decorated beautifully with elegant flowers and lighting, and it was clear that no expense had been spared for the celebration. I watched from a corner of the room as Jake and Emma greeted their guests, looking radiantly happy together. Jake was wearing an expensive suit that I had never seen him wear during our relationship, and he carried himself with a confidence and sophistication that I was seeing for the first time. Emma was absolutely beautiful in an elegant dress, and it was obvious that she and Jake were completely devoted to each other. They moved together naturally, finishing each other's sentences and sharing private smiles and jokes throughout the evening. As I watched Jake interact with his guests, I realized that many of them were clearly successful business owners, wealthy collectors, and other professionals who respected Jake's expertise and success. This was the social circle that Jake had always belonged to, but he had never mentioned it during our relationship because he had been testing my ability to love him without knowing about his wealth and status. About halfway through the evening, Jake took the microphone to give a speech thanking everyone for celebrating his engagement to Emma. I expected him to talk about his love for his fiancée and his excitement about their future together. But instead, Jake began talking about the importance of authenticity in relationships and how grateful he was to have found someone who loved him for his character rather than his financial success. Emma and I met at a time when I had just learned some painful but valuable lessons about what people really value in relationships, Jake said, looking lovingly at his fiancée. I had recently ended a relationship with someone who made it very clear that love and loyalty weren't enough if they weren't accompanied by obvious financial success and social status. My heart started pounding as I realized that Jake was talking about our relationship and our breakup. Several people in the audience were nodding sympathetically, apparently aware of the story Jake was referring to. That experience taught me the importance of being completely honest about who I am and what I value, Jake continued. It also taught me how to recognize people who share those values versus people who are motivated by materialism and social climbing. Jake pulled out his phone and connected it to the venue's sound system. I want to share with everyone a recording that perfectly illustrates the difference between authentic love and superficial attraction. My blood ran cold as I realized what Jake was about to do. He had recorded our breakup conversation, and he was about to play it for his engagement party guests as an example of shallow, materialistic behavior. Jake's voice filled the room as the recording began. Jake, you're almost 30 and you're still working as a mechanic in someone else's garage. You drive a broken-down car, you live in a tiny apartment, and you seem completely content to stay in the same place for the rest of your life. Then my own voice. I need to be with someone who can provide financial security, and who has goals that go beyond just getting by. I want to travel, live in a nice house, and build a life with someone who has ambition and success. You're a good person, but you're just not that person. The room was completely silent as my cruel words played for everyone to hear. I could see guests shaking their heads in disgust and looking at each other with expressions of disbelief at my shallow, hurtful behavior. The recording continued with Jake's dignified response and my defensive justifications for prioritizing financial status over genuine connection. By the time it ended, I wanted to disappear through the floor. Jake looked directly at me across the crowded room. He had known I was there the entire time. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet my ex-girlfriend Stephanie, who is here tonight probably hoping to apologize now that she's learned about my financial success. Every head in the room turned to stare at me with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. I had been completely exposed as the shallow, gold-digging person I had revealed myself to be. Stephanie taught me that some people can only love what you can give them, not who you actually are, Jake continued. Emma taught me that real love means accepting someone completely, regardless of their bank account or social status. Jake raised his glass for a toast. So thank you, Stephanie, for showing me exactly what I didn't want in a life partner. Because of you, I knew how to recognize authentic love when I found it with Emma. The room erupted in applause and laughter as Jake and Emma kissed, while I stood frozen in humiliation and shame. I had been completely exposed and publicly humiliated in front of people who now knew exactly what kind of person I was. As I tried to leave the party as quickly as possible, Jake approached me one final time. Stephanie, he said calmly, I hope you learned something tonight about the difference between love and greed. Emma makes a teacher's salary and drives a 10-year-old car, but she loves me for who I am. You couldn't love me when you thought I was broke, but now you're here because you found out about my money. Jake handed me a business card. By the way, I bought the marketing firm where you work last month. Consider this your termination notice. I don't want employees who can't recognize value when they see it. My humiliation was complete. Not only had Jake exposed my shallow behavior to a room full of people, but he had also fired me from my job as his final act of revenge. 6 months later, Jake and Emma were married in what I heard was a beautiful, intimate ceremony. Jake had apparently given Emma access to his full wealth after their engagement, and she had been overwhelmed by his generosity and trust. Meanwhile, I lost my job, my relationship with Derek ended when he found out about my connection to Jake, and I had to rebuild my career and reputation from scratch. The man I had thought was too broke and unambitious to deserve my love had turned out to be worth $50 million, and had found someone who loved him authentically. My pursuit of financial security and social status had cost me the best relationship I had ever had, and taught me painful lessons about my own values and character. Sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is judging someone by their bank account instead of their heart. I learned that lesson too late, and Jake made sure I would never forget it.